It crossed the border like a shadow, a jaguar, massive and near mythical, haunting the Arizona hills. Locals whispered about Ghost Tail, the beast that killed without a sound, vanishing before the blood dried. When it reached Elijah McCree's land, it didn't find cattle. It found 15 battle-trained dogs and a man with nothing left to lose. But what that jaguar did to those dogs in a single night left scars deeper than claw marks, and a silence no bullet could break. The desert was unusually still that evening, the kind of stillness that made even the crickets think twice. Elijah sat on his porch, boots planted firm, a rusted rifle across his lap. The last of the sun bled into the jagged hills, casting long shadows that didn't move with the wind. Inside the pen, the dogs were uneasy. Rook paced the fence line, his ears stiff. Clove whimpered once, then stared into the mesquite trees, like she saw something Elijah couldn't. Then came the smell. Thick, iron, wrong. Dusty let out a low growl. Tanner barked once, sharp and panicked. Elijah stood. Down the ridge, a cow let out a scream. Not a moo, a scream. He grabbed the lantern, heart steady but pulse quick, and muttered, "You made a mistake coming here." In the dirt near the fence post, fresh prints the size of dinner plates. Ghost Tail had arrived. Elijah McCree had been a hunter before he was anything else. Not by hobby, by blood. His father died in the hills, chasing a cougar that had taken 2 goats. Elijah was 10 when he dragged the body back with the help of a mule and 2 half-starved hounds. That kind of thing shapes a man. He lived alone in a crooked cabin, nestled where the saguaro gave way to mesquite scrub, miles from any neighbor. His wife had died of cancer 15 years back, and since then, Elijah talked more to dogs than people. Not that he minded. The dogs didn't lie, didn't pity. They just listened and fought when asked. Rook had been with him the longest, big, black and silent. Clove, the sleek, brindle female, could smell a snake under sand. Dusty never barked. He followed tracks like they were written in ink. Tanner was barely grown, but eager. Grit was half-wild, born mean and raised hard. The rest of the pack? Loyal, lethal, and obedient. That week, rumors swirled through the CB radio Elijah kept wrapped in a flannel shirt under the sink. Some rancher down near Douglas had lost 4 cattle in 2 nights. Clean kills. No noise, no mess. That's how they knew. Only one thing kills that quiet. A jaguar. Most folks laughed it off. Jaguars hadn't lived this far north in decades. Maybe a young male, someone said. Maybe a fluke. But Elijah wasn't most folks. When he found those prints by his fence, deep and fresh, he didn't doubt it. He didn't call Fish and Wildlife, didn't call the sheriff, didn't call anyone. He went into his shed, took down the 30-06 he hadn't fired in years, and cleaned it with a cloth that still smelled faintly of gun oil and sweat. Then he fed the dogs a double portion of venison jerky. That night, he didn't sleep. Just sat in the dark with the rifle across his knees, listening. He wasn't after glory. He wasn't after the bounty someone whispered about on the radio. He just knew what came next, when a predator stops fearing fences. He'd been on the other side of that look before, and this time he had something worth protecting. By sunrise, the prints were gone, blown smooth by desert wind, but Elijah had seen them, and more. Near the livestock pen, tufts of black fur and a smear of blood told him one of the neighbor's calves had strayed too close to the brush. He didn't wait for daylight to stretch long. By mid-morning, he and the dogs were on the move. The desert was a riddle he knew how to read. Bent grasses, claw marks on stone, a half-chewed bone. They whispered to him like old friends. The trail led south toward the low canyons near an old mining site, long abandoned and forgotten by anyone who didn't grow up breathing its dust. That's where Ghost Tail had gone, and the bastard wasn't running. Elijah knew it by the pattern. The prints curved deliberately, backtracking at times, even vanishing completely, like the cat was testing him, mocking him. "This ain't no mountain lion," he muttered. "This one thinks." Around noon, the sun like a furnace overhead, Clove stiffened, her nose twitched. Rook let out a deep rumble. The others froze. From the rocks above, a single stone rolled down. Then the silence cracked. Ghosttail came like a bullet from a barrel, out of the ridge, teeth flashing. A roar like gravel poured through fire. Tanner didn't even see it coming. The young dog yelped once, a short, high sound, then vanished beneath the cat's weight. The other dogs swarmed in, but the jaguar fought like it had war in its blood. Grit lunged and got clawed across the shoulder. Dusty took a swipe to the flank and spun off, bleeding. Elijah raised his rifle, found the cat in his scope, but Tanner was still underneath, twitching. One wrong move, and he'd shoot his own. He held fire. Ghosttail turned, saw Elijah, and bolted, not from fear, from strategy. The cat leapt up the rock face like it had wings. By the time Elijah reached Tanner, the pup was breathing, barely. One eye swollen shut, a rib poking wrong under the skin. He wrapped the dog in his coat, hands shaking not from age, but rage. The rest of the pack stood around him, bloodied and silent. The dream was over. This wasn't a clean kill. It wasn't revenge. This was war. And Ghosttail had drawn first blood. They moved slower now. By the third day, Tanner couldn't walk. Elijah left him at a shaded outcrop, with water and a strip of meat, wrapping the pup in his old army poncho. He whispered into his ear, something about coming back. Tanner didn't lift his head. The pack was down to 14, but even that number felt hollow. They followed Ghosttail deeper into the canyon, a place Elijah hadn't seen in decades. The map in his mind went quiet there. It was land that didn't want company. No birds, no wind, just rock and heat and that smell, wild, thick and coppery. At dusk they found a cow, or what was left of it, just the spine, half-picked clean, drag marks in the dust. The bastard wasn't even hiding his kills anymore. He was flaunting them. That night, they camped near a dry riverbed. Elijah didn't sleep. Neither did the dogs. Clove whined once, long and low. Then came the growl. Not one of the dogs. Something else. Rook stood, rigid as stone, staring into the black. The attack was fast, faster than before. Ghosttail launched from the shadows like he'd grown out of the canyon wall itself. He hit the edge of the camp, claws tearing into Dusty before Elijah could even lift the lantern. Dusty yelped, rolled, bled into the sand. The rest of the pack exploded in motion. Clove lunged, Grit slammed into the cat's shoulder. Rook went for the neck. Elijah fired once, too high. The flash lit the canyon for a heartbeat. Ghosttail twisted midair, landed like water and vanished again into the dark. Just gone. Dusty wasn't moving. Elijah crouched beside him, pressed a hand to his side, still warm, but fading. He looked up at the dogs, battered, limping, panting. Rook's ear was half torn off. Clove's leg bled from a deep gash. Grit had a gouge down his back like a whip made of bone. This wasn't a hunt. This was punishment. The canyon seemed to mock them with silence. Elijah sat back, dropped the rifle beside him, and ran both hands down his face. The grit in his palms stung his eyes. "You sons of bitches don't have to keep going," he said, voice hoarse. "Ain't no shame in turning back." But none of them moved. Even Clove, limping and shaking, stared into the dark, ears forward. That was the part that broke him. Not the blood, not the exhaustion, not even Dusty dying in his arms. It was their loyalty. They followed him into hell without asking why. And for what? Pride? Revenge? He thought of Tanner alone under that poncho, thought of Dusty's silence, of Grit's pain, and then something cracked inside him. Not a break, not yet, but a bend. The kind that comes right before a man learns he's not as strong as he thought. He didn't cry. Elijah McCree hadn't cried since burying his wife, but his breath hitched in the dark. Just once. And that was enough. He whispered something to Dusty as the dog's breath went still, a thank you, or maybe a goodbye. Then he rose, rifle back in hand, and faced the canyon. "You want a war, cat?" he muttered into the black. "You got it," but his voice sounded small. The kind of small only a jaguar would hear and understand. Morning didn't break. It bled. A pale red stretched over the canyon rim like a wound that wouldn't close. Elijah sat by the fire's last ember, hands raw, eyes dry. Rook lay at his feet, his breathing shallow but steady. Clove hadn't slept. Grit paced the edge of camp, dragging his back paw. They were all still here. That was something. He stared into the canyon again, the path ahead still dark and unforgiving. No fresh tracks, no sound. Ghost Tail had disappeared, but not because he ran, because he was watching. That thought sat in Elijah's chest like a stone. He'd hunted pumas, wolves, even bears in his time. But this cat, this jaguar, it didn't behave like prey. It behaved like judgment, like something sent to test a man's reason for living. The rifle across his lap suddenly felt heavier than any kill shot he'd ever made. He thought of Dusty's body, now buried beneath a cairn of stone, thought of Tanner left alone in the hills, thought of the way Ghost Tail could have killed more, but didn't. What if this wasn't just a hunt? What if it was a message? You're not the same man, he whispered to himself, not the one who used to hunt for pride, for the stories, for the notch in the rifle stock. This time was different. This time, he was the intruder. The wind shifted, and with it came a faint scent. Blood, old and bitter, mixed with the dry musk of wildcat. The jaguar was close again, maybe injured, maybe resting, but not retreating. Elijah looked at his dogs, battered, bloodied, loyal beyond sense. Then he stood, not out of rage, not out of revenge, but because something in him understood. This was no longer about winning. It was about ending it, on his terms. He picked up the rifle, not to conquer, but to finish, not as a hunter, but as a man who owed his dogs a reason. By midday they moved again, not with energy, but with rhythm. Slow, steady, deliberate. Elijah walked ahead, rifle down. The dogs followed in staggered formation, Rook limping but alert, Clove sniffing every breeze. Grit dragged a back leg, but never once looked back. They crossed into unfamiliar terrain, red rocks split by dry washes, thorned brush clinging to the walls like scars. A narrow passage wound between two cliffs, tight enough that Elijah's shoulders brushed both sides. That's where Ghost Tail left a message. On the stone wall, 4 fresh claw marks, deep and straight, as if carved by a knife. Not a trail marker, a warning. Elijah stopped, studied them, then turned to the dogs. He knows we're coming. He meant it. This wasn't just survival. The jaguar was leading them, deeper, higher, thinner, testing them, one by one. At sunset they reached a ridge overlooking a ravine. There were no prints, no signs of struggle, but the air was wrong. Still, tense. A trap, maybe. Elijah didn't speak. Just crouched, listening, watching. That's when Clove let out a soft growl, nose pointed downhill, and in the dust, a single drop of blood. Still wet. The cat was close. Closer than ever. They made camp above the ravine. Elijah didn't light a fire. No point in warning the thing already watching them. The dogs circled tighter tonight, resting against one another, instinct stronger than pain. Rook didn't sleep. He stood facing the dark slope, unmoving. Clove nestled near Elijah's boots, licking her wounded leg. Grit lay flat, chest rising with effort, but his eyes never closed. Elijah sat on a flat rock, turning the rifle in his lap. "You still think we got this in us?" he asked softly. Clove shifted but didn't respond. Of course she didn't. The canyon below breathed heavy in the night, the kind of breathing a man feels in his spine, not his ears. Suddenly, a stone clattered down the slope. Rook growled, deep and low. Elijah raised the rifle, heart steady. But nothing moved. He knew what this was. Ghost Tail wasn't just attacking anymore. He was watching, studying, planning. And that's what scared Elijah more than claws or teeth. The cat wasn't hunting for food anymore. He was hunting for them. At dawn, the air tasted like stone and lightning. Sharp, electric, final. Elijah didn't speak. He just stood, slung his rifle across his back, and nodded once to the dog. Rook moved first, slow but ready. Clove limped behind, nose down. Grit forced himself upright with a grunt. Even half broken, they answered the call. The blood trail led into a gulch choked with twisted oaks and thornbrush. The sun hadn't touched it yet. It was still night there, inside the canyon. That's where Ghosttail waited. Rook stopped cold. Clove let out a bark, high, urgent. Then came the growl, low, not from fear, from depth, from purpose. The Jaguar stepped into view. No more games. He was huge, larger than Elijah had imagined. Muscles rippled beneath blood-matted fur. One eye swollen, a slash across his side, still fresh. But his stare was steady, intelligent, ancient. Rook charged. So did Clove. Grit followed, barking like fire. Ghosttail didn't back down. The impact sounded like bone-shattering wood. Rook bit deep into the cat's shoulder. Clove went for the back leg. Grit tried to circle wide, but Ghosttail spun fast, faster than any injured creature had a right to. He threw Grit aside like a rag. Elijah raised his rifle, found the shot, but froze. The dogs were too close. One twitch, one wrong breath, and he'd hit them instead. Ghosttail flung Clove into the brush, claws tearing skin. Rook held on, jaws locked in fur and flesh, until the cat reared back and slammed him into the canyon wall. The sound cracked through Elijah's ribs. "No!" he shouted, rushing in. Too late. Ghosttail turned, eyes locked on Elijah. Not wild, not afraid, just present. It was the look of something that knew. Then he charged. Elijah dove to the side. The Jaguar barreled past, then twisted with impossible grace. Elijah hit the ground hard. The rifle skidded from his hands. He rolled onto his back and saw Ghosttail above him, one paw raised. No time to crawl, no time to reach the gun. But Rook rose, broken, bleeding, trembling, and still rose. He threw himself onto the Jaguar's side, a final act of defiance. Clove joined. Grit stumbled back into the fray. The pack swarmed. They didn't fight to kill. They fought to stop. And Ghosttail, bloodied and outnumbered, hesitated. He didn't run. He looked at Elijah, chest rising fast, and then, with a snarl, turned and vanished into the shadows. No triumph, just silence. Elijah didn't move for a long time, just lay there listening to the dogs pant. Then he sat up, grabbed Rook's face in both hands and whispered, "You did it, boy." But even then he knew the truth. They hadn't won. Ghosttail had let them live, and that was a different kind of ending. They didn't go after him. Not that day, not ever again. Elijah gathered what was left of his strength and his dogs and made the long walk back to the cabin. No words, no music, just the crunch of dry earth under tired feet. Tanner was waiting under the poncho where he'd left him, tail thumping slow and weak. They all made it home. Some limped. Some bore scars that would never fade. Rook's ribs were cracked. Clove couldn't put weight on her front leg. Grit's eye stayed shut for days. Elijah fixed the fence, buried Dusty in the back pasture with a stone that said nothing but thank you, cleaned the blood from his porch, hung the rifle back on the wall, and never touched it again. He didn't need to, because Ghosttail wasn't just a Jaguar. He was a mirror, one that showed Elijah what was still worth fighting for and what wasn't. And in that reflection, Elijah saw not a hunter, but a guardian. In town, they called it a failure. Old Man lost his edge, had 15 dogs, and still couldn't bring it down. Let them talk. He'd rather be remembered as the man who walked away than the fool who bled his soul dry, chasing something wilder than bullets could catch. And every now and then, late at night, Elijah would step onto his porch and look out toward the hills and listen, just in case Ghosttail was still out there, watching, not as an enemy, but as a witness, to the kind of war that ends when one of you decides not to fight anymore. If this story struck a nerve, leave a like. It helps more folks find tales that remind us what really matters. And hey, I'd love to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. It's always wild to see how far these stories travel. If you felt something here, consider subscribing. We bring more real, raw stories that stay with you long after they end. Sometimes the wild doesn't just test us, it teaches us.